Hi everyone, thanks for joining us for our part 2 of our e-commerce office hours series, where we bring some of our smartest crew to answer questions for you. I'm the marketing manager at goVirtualOffice, and here with me today we have 2 e-commerce gurus to help enlighten us on ways to grow your sales by using data. If you didn't have time to submit questions, that's fine. You can always submit them using our form on our website, and we'll be happy to get you answers for those. Todd, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Todd Parrish. I'm the partner in charge of our managed application services department here at goVirtualOffice.
And Chris?
Hey everyone, thanks for taking the time. My name is Chris Davis. I am a solutions architect at Tadpull. And yeah, really looking forward to chatting through customer loyalty with you guys today. So thanks for taking the time, everyone.
All right, well, we will get off to the races. So can you guys speak to some of the key strategies for building customer loyalty in an e-commerce business?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll go ahead and weigh in on that one. So I think a lot of times people sometimes overcomplicate a lot of things in e-commerce, and a lot of this is ultimately going to come down to business fundamentals, right? And so with that being said, I think honestly the best way to foster loyalty, again, is going to come back to those basics of business and basically just providing value to your customers. This, I would say, starts with just basically having some really good product market fit and then providing a great user experience in that customer's first interaction, ideally. So that's going to include things like how easy your website is to navigate, how quickly it loads, for instance. Even thinking about like the actual experience when it comes to receiving the product and shipping, all those kinds of things. And then certainly customer service interactions are also going to have a really big impact on that too. So I would say, you know, one thing to also just kind of keep in mind is that you don't always need a really big technology investment to be able to foster loyalty. Again, a lot of that is going to come down to those business basics that we talked about, but we've also seen great success from people just using like email and SMS segments as kind of a proxy for a loyalty program and using unique messaging and value adds to those specific customers as a way to provide value to that specific subset of loyal customers. So Todd, anything you'd add to that one?
Yeah, you know, I agree totally with the customer experience. You know, everything starts with the experience. You know, do you have a good product? Do you have a good service? You know, it's always going to start that loyalty, and that's going to drive that loyalty. But once you get past that and the things that you mentioned, Chris, also some really like low-hanging fruit that I think is really important is clean customer data. You know, do you have the right data? Do you have the right first name? Do you have the right last name? Do you have the right information about their segmentation? So do you have all the data that you really need to be able to provide timely and valuable information digitally? You know, the more that you know, the more things that you do to get that information and track that in, you know, like in our world in NetSuite, like, do we have the appropriate custom fields set up on the customer record to track that data? So then we do go back to them and say, hey, we really want to position this new service or offering to these people, but if it's contrary to what they really want as a product, we're not going to have that, you know, that fit. But if we do, then yes, then we're automatically going to start to build that loyalty, because loyalty is really built on trust. And if like, hey, if you're calling me Tom, but my name's Todd, well, guess what? You've already broken that cycle of trust. So to me, getting that product data set up right and massaging that and cleaning that up, with that, also making sure if for whatever reason you start seeing duplication of records in your ERP system, hey, am I being diligent in cleansing my data, cleaning my data up so my stuff's together? So if I'm looking at my transaction list, I'm seeing all my transactions and getting that full picture. That's another thing. So getting it set up right, and then also cleaning that data as you go along.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that, Todd. And one thing I might also add to that, just on the data side, is also kind of thinking about it from a product perspective and knowing, hey, like which kinds of products are going to be best for a first-time customer versus a repeat customer, depending on the type of the business that you're in. Those might look very different. They might look a little bit more similar in some instances, but really knowing like, hey, this is more of a gateway product that we know is going to help activate a customer from their 0 to their first purchase. That might look very different from getting someone to their 3rd to their 4th purchase, as an example. Correct. So I'm really glad you mentioned the data side of things too.
Yep.
All right. How important is customer loyalty in driving sales and growth for an online retailer?
Long story short, it's supremely important. I mean, not only just from like the obvious perspective of it's obviously going to be a really big revenue stream for the business, which is, you know, the reason why we're in business in the first place. But it's also going to make predicting future cash flows much more accurate, which that can impact everything from like your inventory purchasing, for instance, knowing how much you need to buy for the next upcoming season, budgeting for ad spend, and just a lot of other ways that are going to impact the business in a really positive way. Another really big assist that we see come a lot is where it actually comes to the actual value of the business, right? And so if you have a lot of really consistent repeat purchasers, that's going to take risk off of an investor's plate, which basically means the business can keep a larger equity stake for the same cash investment, all else equal. And so a lot of this actually comes from research from Dr. Peter Fader of the Wharton School and also of Theta Equity, which basically goes into using customer lifetime value to drive business valuations. And again, it's just a really awesome way to be able to take risk off of an investor's plate. And again, that's going to provide value to the business in a lot of different ways. So one other thing that I also might add to that is it also limits the reliance on needing to use paid spend to acquire customers for each sale, basically. So if we've already acquired a customer, whether that was through paid or through other channels, we can hopefully use our own channels like email, SMS, the website, for instance, to be able to foster that same customer into a repeat buyer without having to basically pay to acquire them twice, essentially. So those are always kind of the first things that come to my mind when it comes to that.
Yeah, and I would add, and I've heard, you know, different people, different business owners or a strategist say a customer is really not a customer until they bought something the second time. You know, that really that first time, you know, that's great, but did you get them to have that second or third or fourth purchase? So to me, you know, I definitely had on this one, acquisition costs are lower. You know, you spend that money to get that customer, so how do you maximize on that? But also going back to really the first point is like, the more time you spend with that customer, the more information you're likely to get from that customer. So you're going to have a deeper understanding of what that is. Plus also, then that allows you to have an insight to why they're purchasing from you. And really, as you start reactively with your products, what do we need to carry? What do we need to improve on and things of that nature? The more data, more trends you see with that loyalty actually goes to your question, and Chrissy was like, how does that drive sales? Actually, to me, it's like, how do I drive profitability? You know, because once I get past that initial sale, that one time, my profit margins are probably going to be pretty low on that first time acquisition if I'm using a promotion or things of that nature to get them in the door, that loss leader. But my profitability should really start going up because of loyalty. You know, you look at Apple, you know, they're a master at creating a brand. You know, they have very high profit margins because they have a brand, because they have that loyalty to that brand. So really, you can see they're a great use case where they created that loyalty, which in essence led to their profitability.
Right.
Yeah, and too, also along those lines, sorry, just real quick, I think too that like a lot of when it comes to the profitability is going to be thinking about ways to provide value to loyal customers, perhaps beyond just discounting. So to your point, Todd, like a company like Apple is doing a great job of being profitable with their repeat customers, and they're not always doing so just through promotions and discounts and things like that. So again, that can be ways, that can be even just things like having great you know, products that make sense for repeat buyers, or whether that's ways that we're educating people post-purchase, for instance, all kinds of things that we need to provide value beyond just discounting, I think is really important to keep in mind. Sorry,
it's a cross-pollination and the cross sales at that point, you know, and that's where you see so much of the trend is you have service, you know, people that are doing services are now selling products, and people that are doing products are now selling services. So that's a great way to lead towards that profitability with that cross-selling. Specifically in that area is really the cross-pollination.
Yeah, those are all really good things to consider. What do you think are some common reasons why customers might not be loyal to an e-commerce brand?
Yeah, so I think from my perspective, a lot of that is the other side of the coin that we talked about in that first question, where, right, I mean, having poor first experiences, either during the actual purchase experience or even in the post-purchase experience, are definitely going to be detriments when it comes to fostering customer loyalty. So again, that could be things like having a poor shipping experience. Perhaps the website was slow, or maybe we had a bad customer service interaction where we tried to ask a question and we weren't able to actually get that answered, for instance. Those are things that are all going to be definitely negatively affecting customer loyalty. I would also say too, something that sometimes gets overlooked is when it comes to that post-purchase experience. Things that I've seen really have a negative impact on customer loyalty would be like folks not being mindful of like frequency of ads, especially after post-purchase. Like one of the most annoying things that can happen in the e-commerce world is you start getting ads for something you just bought. And it's like, what the heck? I just bought this. Why am I seeing the ad for the sunglasses that I'm still waiting to get shipped, for instance? So those things are definitely going to be super important. Again, some of that comes back to the actual data that we can capture when it comes to customer loyalty and knowing like, hey, it's probably not right for us to be trying to reactivate a customer within 48 hours of them making their first purchase. That may make sense for some businesses. It probably doesn't for most, I would guess there. So I'd say, think about not only the actual experience buying the product, but also the post-purchase experience. And one other thing too that I've seen that can sometimes have a negative effect and can sometimes lead to getting like poor reviews and things like that is actually asking for a review too soon. Certainly asking for a review before the person's even received the product, that's definitely a big no-no, but also making sure that they've had enough time to actually use that product. So like if we're gonna sell like, I don't know, a hunting jacket, for instance, like let's not ask for a review within 48 hours of them actually getting that. Let's make sure they've had a chance to actually go out and use that in the field, be able to give us an actual real life review. So those are always things that I try to keep in mind for sure.
Yeah, and I'll double down on what Chris said, is that really being tone deaf. A lot of times you'll see that, and I think that generally speaking, people understand that there's going to be automation. They really don't think Chris at Tadpull is emailing after each person saying, "Hi, how did you like that product? Thanks, Chris." They know that. But they don't want to be slapped in the face that, hey, that you didn't set up your workflow to give me a week. So and so it leads to like inaccurate automation and setting up of those tools, and in your marketing department, a lot of times making sure that those things are set up in the right cadence. Because like I said, people understand there's going to be automation. And then also like, at times people, when you buy something like, hey, would you also be interested in this? And not following up on that. So like, hey, if you're asking those questions, you're being wise at the checkout, like, hey, what are some other things that you'd be interested in? If I'm grabbing that data, but then you never follow up for the second date, well, why didn't you call me back for the second date? So it's like being wise on the other way, area, like, instead of being too hasty, make sure that you do follow up in an appropriate time on that, especially on B2B. And those that are doing B2B e-commerce and things like that, B2B is more common that you're going to have a company that gets assigned a sales rep. Okay, so is that sales rep following up with that in their territory and say, hey, saw that you bought something, hey, we really like to talk to you about this as well. So getting that sales rep follow up, because a lot of people do their shopping B2B without a sales rep e-commerce wise, but there is a value to that, at least giving them the option to say, I'm good, I don't really need a sales rep, but have that. And then the last thing I was going to add to that is one thing that I think that people forget, that nobody ever wants mistakes to happen, nor would you ever do something wrong on purpose. But I've found that through a lot of times great loyalty comes from businesses that can actually correct their mistakes in a positive light. And to me, when a mistake happens, do you have the opportunity to prove that, hey, we're a good company, we have a good product, we made a mistake, but not only we have a good product, but we actually stand behind it. So how can I prove to you that we are a great company to buy from, not just the product? So I almost look at times that if there's a mistake, how can we prove who we are as a company and who our culture is? By magnifying that through a mistake. And I actually think some of your most loyal customers are the ones that lived through a mistake that you shined. So use those as opportunities to correct that.
Yeah, you've definitely heard those customer stories where I think of like Chewy, where they mail out the food and then they're like, oh, my dog died, and like they have made such a good brand presence on that, where they're sending them flowers and they're like, donate it to a shelter, like they're triggering all of those heartfelt moments that it's like capitalizing on that, where really they could have missed that opportunity. There's definitely a lot of opportunity out there for brands to really get those touch points.
Yeah.
And I laugh at the automation thing because that's like my pet peeve, and I don't know if it's because I'm a marketer, but I'm like, seriously, I haven't even gotten the product You want me to read something? And I'm sure it's something automatic on Amazon or something, but it's always like a trigger for me where I'm like, come on.
Yeah. Yeah, and I always warn people because we do a lot of automation at times in NetSuite is I'm just like, okay, I am all for automation, but you had to make sure that it is exact because it's a machine gun. It's going to do exactly what you tell it to do. So make sure you really have a good workflow process and have thought through that before you actually ever get to a point of digital automation on it. I don't really understand the flow.
Yeah, those are all good points to consider. And do you know what are some of the ways that businesses are actually like measuring the customer loyalty?
Yeah, so I think a lot of this, like when I think about the main KPIs when it comes to customer loyalty, I mean, the first one that always comes to mind for me is customer lifetime value. We've already talked about that a little bit as far as like how that can impact business valuations, things like that, but it can also impact like how much you're willing to pay to acquire a customer, for instance. Like we joke a lot of times at Tadpull, like if your cost per acquisition equals your customer lifetime value, that's probably a business case that e-commerce is not going to be able to solve for you, for instance. And so being able to obviously have that data pretty fingertippy is going to, make your paid campaigns, for instance, more effective. It's also going to, impact how much you invest in some of the other technologies for your other platforms. Beyond customer lifetime value, always looking at the percentage of repeat versus new customers, I think is really important too. And again, that ratio might look different for different businesses, but being able to at least have a good sense of that is definitely going to impact some of your marketing activities as well. And then one thing that I think sometimes gets overlooked when it comes to customer loyalty is thinking about a net promoter score. If we can consistently have a lot of promoters to the business, all else equal, you would guess that those folks are going to be more loyal than passives or certainly detractors as well. And so I think keeping an eye on all of those metrics, maybe less so the actual dollars and cents, but maybe more so the actual trend line when it comes to those things, that'll probably give you a pretty good sense as far as how you're doing when it comes to fostering loyalty.
Yeah, I agree totally on the customer lifetime value. That's always a big one. That's a really, in NetSuite's an easy thing to do. You could be able to get that. Also, going back to a little bit of the categorization that I mentioned before, like what's their average order spend? So if you are having things broken down by categories, or they have different data points, and I'll just use a B2B, go back to B2B example. If I'm a sales rep and I'm looking at my customer and I'm seeing what their average order is compared to what our actual average is, well, I'm starting to get an idea where they fit in that, spending time then on marketing or what have you with that customer. So then also, what is your average time between orders, as well, or is it every 2 months? Is it every 6 months, every 9 months? So, looking at the dollars on the average, but also on the duration of that as well, because everybody's, not everybody, but a lot of businesses are seasonal. Some things is a commodity where it's like every month you have a subscription order or what have you. But also you can start to look and say, okay, boy, we usually trend about 45 days between orders, but this customer is coming in at every 4 or 5 months. Well, that's trying to tell me that somebody else is selling in that account, or they're buying someplace else in that duration. So like your duration time, and from an ERP's perspective, like NetSuite, we're able to date and timestamp everything. So you can start to really get those variances of what's the average variance between the orders. And that's really another data point that you can ping against.
Yeah, Todd, I'm really glad that you mentioned basically looking at like what the actual cycle looks like when it comes to those repeat buyers. And so you could call that a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's called propensity, which is basically just a way that's going to predict the likelihood that a customer is going to take a certain action. In this case, basically make a repeat purchase. And so, even thinking on like the B2C side of things, I think there's a lot of ways that you can use that data directly to impact, for instance, your remarketing windows on paid, how often you're going to send reactivation campaigns in email. I think that's basically a great way to avoid some of the pitfalls that we had previously talked about when it comes to some of those post-purchase pitfalls that we've seen in the past. So really glad you mentioned that one too.
Yep.
And this next one kind of dovetails, you guys touched on it. How are people using technology and data just to improve their customer loyalty programs?
Yeah, for sure. Well, again, in my mind, I think a lot of when it comes to the actual technology and data, like the technology is what's going to allow you to be able to access that data. And then what you do with that data is going to be super important. I'd say beyond that, right, there's obviously different kind of more plug and play loyalty solutions that I would say are more kind of discount based, which is obviously a great way to basically get up and running quickly. But even beyond that, again, I think, right, if you have good data on your customers' propensity to be able to be making repeat purchases, that again is going to be a super easy way to have you basically drive your different marketing activities in paid, email, and also just on the website as well. So anything you'd add to that, Todd?
Nope, I think you covered that one pretty well.
So can you guys speak to any of the challenges that an e-commerce business might face just trying to maintain their customer loyalty program?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, from my mind, I think I kind of keep coming back to this theme that we've talked about, where a lot of it is going to be finding the balance between staying top of mind, but also not being overzealous in some of our marketing efforts. So again, like rather than, for instance, trying to get somebody to make their second purchase, again, like 2 days after they made their first one, well, maybe we're going to follow up with some really important post-purchase information. If it's like a really technical product, for instance, like, hey, here's how you use this, here's how you use it safely. These are the common pitfalls when it comes to using the product, those types of things. So I would say, just thinking about ways that we can provide value without just being, sale, buy our stuff, all the time. I think is super important. And a lot of that comes from just putting yourself in the customer's shoes and being able to come at it basically from a place of empathy, essentially.
Yeah, I think empathy is a great place to start out with. And I wrote down on this one, especially e-commerce, the evolution, that it really shouldn't be, here's the loyalty program, we're going to have this loyalty program the way that it is for the next 5 years. That it really should be evolving. And really that comes from listening to your customers, in asking for feedback on that and really being reactive in that way and listening for hints. Because not everybody, everybody has a very busy life. Very rare does people have hours and hours to do nothing. They have a lot of competition for their time. So to me, if you're doing some proactive things to try to get some feedback, listen for the hints, because it's not always going to be shouts. But if you hear a couple of hints from people, there's probably a good portion of your customers that are going to feel that way. So make sure to listen to those hints, proactively ask questions. And do things a little bit different. Like Chris mentioned, don't always send an email to get that. If you have a customer success team or CSRs there, and there's a 4-hour period, and you have phone numbers for some of your customers, do you actually take the risk and say, hey, you're a really good customer, can we get a little bit of feedback, and proactively do that? So not always doing the same thing as everybody else. Sometimes you got to mix it up and evolve to be able to get that relationship built.
Yeah, Todd, I'm really glad that you mentioned just like talking to your actual customers, because I think that's one thing that people like forget all the time, right? We know that we have this subset of really loyal customers. We can just ask them, whether that's a phone call or a survey, things like that. And the more data that we get from those folks, hopefully we can use that to then provide similar experiences to others. And then that really loyal cohort is hopefully going to grow over time. So really glad you mentioned that, because sometimes it's like the most like simple and obvious thing, but it's something that we don't always think about.
Yeah, the most shocking thing could be like, hey, somebody actually wants to talk to me, and that's really the way it's gone. So I'm here on mute, Chrissy.
Oh, sorry.
There you go.
I was saying, like, not a robot, not a chat bot, somebody that's a person. That's so refreshing when you're calling customer service. You're like, oh my gosh, it's a human. Yay.
Yeah.
So I think cutting through the noise too, because everybody's talking about, shorter attention span and, third-party data is going away. There's all these things that are being put as barriers. If you guys had like a crystal ball and could tell us, like, what do you foresee in the future as being some of the most important trends coming? I know you guys stated, obviously, some of the most obvious things, like actually just picking up the phone. But if you see any other trends that you'd want to mention?
I think for me, a lot of what I see the future of loyalty looking like is going to be centered around providing value in ways beyond just discounting, right? Because I think, right, competition online is going to get probably harder for everyone, pretty much regardless of which vertical that you're in. And competing just on price is basically just a race to the bottom, right? And so if there's ways that we can provide value with best things like, early access to new products, or like unique colorways, ways to customize products, whether that comes in some of the post-purchase education, and really, I think thinking about how you can position yourself as an authoritative source in whatever space that you're in, that's going to really help you, again, stay top of mind. It's also going to kind of naturally foster loyalty, again, beyond some of the discounting. I'm not going to say discounting certainly has its place for sure, but if that's your only strategy for loyalty, you're maybe not actually fostering as much loyalty as you might think that you are.
Yeah, and I agree, Chris, once again, that to me, when I look at from a non-technology perspective, things that I see that some people are doing that will really increase is the experience. You mentioned other things than a discount. Can you provide an experience or do something in a manner that if you do have a customer loyalty program, that you have access to, say, a product designer of shoes, say you sell shoes. Hey, you know what? If you're part of our loyalty program and you're at this level, hey, we have a webinar where you get and come and ask our shoe designer questions about those shoes or what have you. Those are things that, to me, go back to, I think, are really great business ideas that don't necessarily add a tremendous amount of cost, but really provide a tremendous amount of value to those people who are really brand enthusiasts and are going to cater to those people that you really want to that. From a technology perspective, to me, it's one of the reasons why we've always loved working with Tadpull is that BI and data, just understanding your data, is to me so powerful now at a small to medium-sized business level, that it used to be that was exclusively for your enterprise or larger mid-markets, that they would have a data analyst or some kind of tool set to be able to really capture that information. And like in the boots department in 2022, we actually hired onto our team a data analyst. That is all they do. They're not a data importer, they're not that, but they work with workbooks and analytics and are you doing enough mining of that data out of there to find out? Because to me, yes, it's great having loyal customers, but which are the most profitable loyal customers, and finding that, because it's not always just sales. Went back to this profitability. Are we getting the right profitable customers? Who are they? How do we expand upon that? So I think that BI is really going to be a driver for those small to medium-sized businesses that have now made that jump to e-commerce because of COVID. They've lost that connection, that direct connection with customers, where you used to take the orders on the phone, now it's coming through the web store. How do we learn as much as we can, because we've lost that direct connection to those buyers, and now it's a faceless customer. BI is going to be one of those tools that will help you learn what you used to know through a phone call.
Yeah, and going off of what you guys said, is just about listening to the customers. And Old Navy had a 9-year-old girl write in just about why do the boys' jogger pants have pockets and the girls don't? And they changed that, and then they were able to, first they made all the girls ecstatic because now they have pockets, right? Yeah. But they also, it allowed them an avenue to, tell the story of how they're listening to even the littlest voices, and those are the stories that are gonna propel that brand forward.
Yep.
How can businesses use the customer trend data to create a more personalized experience for their customers, and how does that ultimately drive the loyalty?
Yeah, I think again, a lot of this is going to come back to some of that propensity that we had talked about in the past, which again, so right, if you know that a customer isn't going to come back and buy again for 45 days, don't start remarketing to them immediately with some of those products. Again, try perhaps a nurture series to provide value with post-purchase information, maybe ask for a review of a product after an appropriate amount of time has passed. And then I think from there, you can start to try to think about reactivating that customer into a repeat buyer. And then also, again, I think using some of that qualitative data that can come from some of those surveys and things like that, and just knowing hey, why are you loyal to XYZ brand? And then hopefully we can use some of that information as well to, provide that value to a larger cohort of customers, basically. So.
Yeah, and I'll go really data specific on this one, and system specific is that, like Chris mentioned, if you have a product that the shelf life is 45 days, let's just say it's 45 days out on that product, and you know that their average purchase cycle is 2 months, make sure that you're spacing that out from data that you have on your item. You have, like NetSuite, you're able to add custom fields or have different things on there that say what that looks like. So you now have the different elements to be able to start to be really smart or look really smart through automation with that. And, so that's really, to me, just a reminder, because like certain things, I think a good example a lot of times is vitamins. It's not, for most people, vitamins aren't like, hey, I'm at a health risk if I don't take my vitamins. But if I am, doing a 60-day capsule and I know that, okay, I haven't received that in like, 75 days, that maybe they forgot to reorder that. So just providing that light reminder, hey, we haven't seen this. Would you like to go ahead and reorder? Things like that. Here's the link to click on, blah, blah, blah. So some of those things you can use as a reminder, but also just to be smart not to be too pushy. So
yeah, for sure. And I think one thing that I'd also add to that is we had kind of previously talked on the customer side, and again, I know that we mentioned this as well on the product side, but again, also just knowing which kinds of products make sense for which kinds of buyers. Somebody who purchases for the first time is, oftentimes going to be purchasing something very different than maybe their fourth or their fifth purchase. So also keeping that in mind from both the customer data and also a product data perspective is definitely going to make your fostering loyalty more effective for sure.
Yeah, and your seasonality. And, and you should have where they're from, are they in California or are they in Wisconsin? And just being aware of that seasonality based off the data that you have.
Certainly.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. We hope you can join us on our next office hours. And as always, be sure to follow us on social and stay up to date. Thanks for joining us today, guys.
Thank you. Thanks, Chrissy. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
You too.